Bienvenue! Another OmniFocus fitness video. Today we're going to be discussing something that I've titled Caloric Relativity. And basically that is just the inaccuracy in the calorie numbers displayed on food labels. So we're going to discuss that issue as well as how we can use psychology, out of all the subjects. We're going to use psychology and explain why the inaccuracies in a food label do not matter. So without further ado, let's get started. Yeah. Are food labels inaccurate? I've already kind of given the answer to this in the intro. Yes, they are. The reason being because it's based on a kind of outdated calorie method. I don't fully remember the name of it, but it was developed over 100 years ago, and although it's gone through several tweaks and changes, it's still an inaccurate way of measuring calories, and of course there are other reasons as well, but that's the main one. Moving on. So how are the food labels actually inaccurate? I already kind of covered this in the last section about how the method that was developed to measure calories is an outdated one. It's from over 100 years ago, and although it was progressively changed to be a little more accurate and take into account a few more variables, the law actually allows for a 20% shift from the actual calorie number. So if the calorie label says it's 100 calories, the company could technically have their food still unlabeled as 100 calories, although their food in actuality is 120 calories or 80 calories. But surprisingly, I will quick mention that typically the number that's on the food label tends to be an overshoot of the number of calories that are actually in the food, which is kind of surprising. You'd think that companies would try to exploit that as much as possible, but that seems to be the reality in the situation. That's not always the case. It's also very dependent on what foods you're looking at. Whole foods, processed foods, if you go out to eat, things like that, those are all going to impact. And there are of course other reasons, but I'm trying to keep this brief, trying to get to the actual meat of the subject. So if you'd like to know more ways that calories get skewed, then check out those reasons in the article below. Moving on. And finally, let's talk about how psychology can somehow apply to calories. I mean, what the hell are we talking about here? Calories are a very scientific approach, and psychology is often described as a soft science and tends to be attributed to emotions and feelings and how to deal with mental issues. But somehow I am going to link psychology to calories and tell you why it doesn't matter that the food labels are off. And the reason being is because we can look at things from two different contexts. If you read an article and you were to focus on the fact that the calories on a food label are inaccurate, or inaccurate up to about 20%, that can be a pretty big margin of error. And you might think, well, then what's the point in me counting my calories, counting the amount of energy that's going into my body? Well, in a vacuum, out of context, that is a very valid thought process. That's obviously something you'd think, well, what is the point? Why am I doing this? Why, if the calories that I'm seeing on the label are misleading me, then there's no hope for humanity. There's no way I can lose weight. But then the secondary scenario with the context comes in, and we add in psychology. How does psychology apply? Well, psychology applies because humans are creatures of habit. And that is the platform that we can build off of to understand why the caloric relativity, the fact that it can move up or down on a food label, doesn't matter, because most people eat in habit. Okay, so they have several foods that they like to eat, and they eat those on a consistent basis, and then maybe one day they decide, okay, I want to change a food, or I want to try a food, etc., etc. But that baseline of having many foods that they enjoy, you've been eating that for a consistent amount of time, so you know how that affects your body. So if you eat those foods, no matter what the calories say, you've already created that baseline for yourself. After you've created that baseline, then of course somebody might say, well, if that's the case, what if an introduction of a new food might affect how your body responds to the inability to actually read the exact amount of calories? So let's say on a baseline you've been eating 2,000 calories, and you've been eating 2,000 calories out of chicken, rice, vegetables, etc., etc. So you have a list of, let's say, 6 foods. I mean, I know people eat a lot more than just 6 foods, but for simplicity's sake. So out of those 6 foods, you make up the 2,000 calorie baseline. You've been eating that way for 3 months. Your weight has been decreasing slowly. We'll say you're trying to lose weight. Been decreasing slowly. You're losing half a pound a week. And then you're like, I'm getting a little sick. I'm getting a little tired of eating just these 6 foods or 12 foods or 15 foods, whatever amount of foods. And you decide, you know what, Mary told me about this new food that's out, like this new company came out with like this new awesome popcorn or whatever it is. And on the calorie label, it says it's 300 calories, blah, blah, blah. So you introduce it and you count calories. But the calorie label is off. And let's just say somehow you overindulge on popcorn on repeated occasions. Again, in that vacuum, sure, it is a big deal that you can't know exactly how many calories you've taken in. So you may be taking in more. You now, instead of a 2,000 calorie baseline that you think you're doing, because based on the food labels, now you're intaking 2,200 or something, and your weight loss has stalled. And that is an issue, of course. But that's also, the solution is in the psychology of the matter. So again, you're just going to look at your weight loss and you're going to be like, okay, I've stalled out. So then you just reduce the amount that you eat of that popcorn or whatever it is. But eventually, I don't believe, and there are several studies that have shown that the habituation of humans, but I don't believe that people just introduce a food and if they like it, they just eat it once and then they never touch it again. No, if they're going to introduce a food into their nutrition plan or whatever, they're going to keep it in there for a while. They might not eat it every day, but they're going to keep it as a consistent thing. And that being the case, they can measure how that food affects them, completely independent of what the calorie label says. The calorie label is a good starting point, a good foundation, a good source of information. However, the best source of information is what your body is doing. And what your body is doing is reflected in your performance in the gym, in the way you look. Why not? And of course in the scale, as well as we can go into much more depth with that. But those are 3 factors right there, and those don't lie. They don't lie. Like there's no like relativity about it. There's no skewing one way or another. You're either performing better, either look better or you're losing weight or your combination of the three. Those don't lie. That's just the way it is. I mean, I guess you could lie to yourself about how if you look better. I mean, if you gain like 20 pounds and you're trying to lose weight and you're going to say, oh yeah, I look better. No, okay. You can lie to yourself in that way, but the point is, again, that a single food or introducing new foods that you're not really sure about, once it becomes habit, and you've been counting calories and you've been measuring your weight like you should, then, or measuring your performance or whatever you have to measure your progress, it's going to reflect in that. And that is your real marker for actual success in your weight loss or weight gain or strength gain or whatever it is. So psychology, that habituation, that habit forming of human psychology allows us, kind of gives us that buffer where the calories that are on a food label don't matter. Specifically, if you were to eat just a food one time and you didn't like it, you're not going to eat it again. Like, it's not a big deal if for one day, for one meal, you have something that's not completely accurate. And if you do enjoy it, then it's going to become part of your routine. And eventually your body's going to tell you, okay, do I need to cut back a little bit on it? Do I need to go up a little bit on it? And that's the bottom line. Habit is the protection of the human race. Okay, I'm done. That's it. And quickly, in summary, for those of you that do not care to watch the entire video, I've got you covered. Don't worry. Don't worry. Food labels are inaccurate. They can be inaccurate up to 20%, and that might make people think out of context that that is an issue. That's something that needs to be addressed, and you don't really know if counting calories is then worth it. However, it is, because psychology will come to the rescue, and psychology comes to the rescue because we create habits. We are creatures of habit, and because of that, we create baselines for ourselves. We have foods that we know that we enjoy, and whatever foods that we introduce into our diet can easily be adapted based on the feedback that we get from the weight scale, from your body composition, from performance. I mean, you could go on for, there's tons of different other ways of making sure that your nutrition is going the way that you see it going, the way it's supposed to be going. So the actual caloric number that's given on the label is a great reference mark, and it tells you a good point to start with, but ultimately you're going to be changing your diet based on how the results come off in those different measuring techniques. Again, the weight scale, body composition, or your performance in the gym if you're going to be exercising, along with many others. And that's it. That's the video, folks. That's it. There's nothing more. This is actually a relatively short video, surprisingly, and it is also a relatively short article. However, there are more details in the article if you'd like to know more. Also, if you'd like to check out my sources, please subscribe if you found the information useful. And I will see you next week. See ya.